You probably think history is all about battles, empires, and dusty old kings. But let me take you somewhere softer, somewhere slower, to a time when weekends didn't even have names yet, but people still knew how to stop, breathe, and simply live. Welcome to ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where humanity first figured out how to farm, write, and build cities. But what about when they weren't inventing civilization? What about when they were just enjoying a moment of peace? This book isn't about great wars or famous rulers. It's about the quiet rhythms of life, the hum of a marketplace on a sunny afternoon, the scent of warm bread in a clay oven, and the laughter of children splashing in an irrigation canal. It's about how people, thousands of years ago, sought comfort and joy when they weren't working fields or shaping empires in ancient Mesopotamia. Weekends weren't formalized the way they are today. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians organized time by lunar cycles and festivals. Yet even without a Saturday or Sunday, they carved out spaces for leisure. A farmer might spend an afternoon playing a board game called the Royal Game of Yore with his children. A city dweller could visit a ziggurat for a festival honoring Inanna, then sip beer with friends in a tavern as musicians played reed flutes. This book invites you to slow down, to wander the mud-brick streets of your state, to sit under a date palm as traders bring stories from distant lands, to listen to lullabies sung in cuneiforms, soft syllables, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find that imagining their lives will ease your own. After all, history doesn't always have to be exciting to be meaningful. Sometimes, the most boring details, like how a Mesopotamian family spent their free time, are exactly what we need to calm our minds and drift into rest. So, let's travel back 5,000 years and spend a weekend in Mesopotamia. Let's listen to their stories, taste their foods, and feel the gentle pace of life in a world without alarm clocks, emails, or traffic jams. By the time you turn the last page, I hope you'll see that history's quiet corners can be just as comforting as a soft pillow and a warm blanket. Imagine a place where two great rivers weave across the land, like silver threads under the sun. This is Mesopotamia. Here in the land between rivers, life began to bloom more than 5,000 years ago. People built villages of mud brick. They learned to plant wheat and barley in fields that stretched far and wide. They shaped clay into pots and invented writing with simple marks pressed into soft tablets. But even in this busy cradle of civilization, people knew how to rest. The Mesopotamians worked hard. Farmers rose early to guide water from the rivers into their fields. Potters sat for hours, spinning clay on wheels. Scribes hunched over tablets to record trade and laws. But life was not all work. When the sun climbed high and the air shimmered with heat, they stopped. They wiped sweat from their brows and found shade under the wide leaves of date palms. In these quiet moments, they let the world slow down. There were no weekends, as we know them, but there were days of pause and celebration. Every month, the people watched the moon grow fat and full, and then slip away to nothing. The phases of the moon marked time. The seventh day after the new moon was special. It was called the Shapatu. Some scholars think this might have been an early version of the Sabbath. On the Shapatu, people rested. They offered prayers to their gods. They spent time with family and neighbors. in the city's life moved to a different rhythm. Merchants filled the streets with the calls of trade. Bakers pulled flatbread from clay ovens. Donkeys brayed as they carried baskets of figs and melons. But even here, people found ways to relax. At midday, the market quieted. The sun pressed down hard on the rooftops, and people retreated indoors. In shaded courtyards, they shared meals of lentils and roasted lamb. Children played with clay toys shaped like animals. Women ground spices for evening stews while humming soft songs. Leisure in Mesopotamia was simple yet rich. One favorite pastime was playing board games. The royal game of yore was loved by kings and farmers alike. It was played on a small wooden board with carved squares. Players moved pieces along the path, hoping for good luck with their dice. The game was more than fun. It was a way to connect to others. Fathers taught it to sons. Friends gathered around the board as evening breezes cooled the air. Music filled the air at festivals and in homes. Mesopotamians played harps and lyres. They sang hymns to their gods, but they also sang about love and life. A man might strum a lyre as his children clapped along. Women sang lullabies to calm restless babies. The sound of music wove through their lives like the rivers that sustained their fields. Rest was sacred, too. In the temples, priests and priestesses offered incense and chants to soothe both gods and humans. During big festivals, the entire city would pause work. Streets filled with dancers in bright linen robes. Drums and flutes played from sunrise to sunset. People feasted on dates, bread, beer, and honey. For a few days, everyone from the king to the humblest farmer shared in the joy of celebration. In the villages, rest was quieter, but no less important. After days in the fields, families sat together under starlit skies. They listened as elders told stories of gods and heroes. These stories were passed down like precious seeds from one generation to the next. A child might drift to sleep in her mother's lap as the tale of Gilgamesh and Enkidu unfolded in the warm night air. Sleep came easily in those times. Without electric lights, the world turned dark and calm when the sun set. People lay on reed mats covered with wool blankets. The soft hum of insects and the distant croak of frogs filled the silence. In their dreams, they walked again by the rivers or watched the stars wheel slowly above. The art of relaxation in Mesopotamia was not about escaping life, but about sinking deeper into its rhythms. Work and rest flowed together like the Tigris and Euphrates. Even in the earliest cities, people knew they needed time to pause, to breathe, to simply be. This chapter is only the first glimpse of a world where leisure and labor balanced each other. In the next chapter, we will step closer into the heart of a Mesopotamian weekend to see what foods they ate when they wanted to celebrate and unwind. When you think of ancient Mesopotamia, you might imagine kings and warriors or rows of scribes carving clay tablets in cool, shaded rooms. But beneath all that history were families and neighbors sharing meals that brought comfort and joy. Food was not just for survival, it was also for celebration, for moments of rest, and for the simple pleasure of tasting life's gifts. In Babylon, the city's walls rose high and strong, casting wide shadows across streets of baked mud brick. Early in the morning, before the heat grew heavy, market stalls opened along narrow alleys. Merchants spread linen cloths and placed their goods in neat rows. Fresh vegetables glistened with dew. Dates still sticky from their harvest clung together in sweet clusters. Large clay jars held honey that smelled the flowers from the desert edge. On quiet days, when work paused, the market took on a softer sound. Instead of the sharp calls of trade, there was a hum of calm voices and the laughter of children. Families strolled slowly, stopping to taste bread warm from an oven. Women chose lentils and chickpeas from baskets, while their husbands examined smoked fish or jars of oil. Back in their homes, people prepared meals with patience. Kitchens were open courtyards where sunlight filtered through palm fronds. A fire crackled in a clay hearth as pots bubbled with soups and stews. The air filled with the scent of garlic, onions, cumin, and coriander. These spices had traveled far along dusty trade roads to reach the heart of Mesopotamia. A favorite treat was flatbread. Bakers slapped soft dough against the hot walls of their round ovens called tandoors. The bread cooked quickly, turning golden and crisp on the edges. Families tore off pieces and dipped them into thick stews of lamb and barley. On special days, the bread might be brushed with sesame oil and sprinkled with crushed dates for sweetness. Beer was another gift of rest. Brewed from barley, it was thick and nourishing, almost like a meal in itself. People drank it from wide clay bowls, using long reed straws to filter out grains. It was common for families to sit together, sipping beer slowly as the sun moved across. The sky children played nearby, their laughter mixing with the low murmur of conversation. Lazy afternoons often meant sharing fruits from the garden. Figs plucked fresh from the tree were soft and warm. Pomegranates split open to reveal seeds like tiny rubies. Farmers sometimes brought home melons cooled in irrigation canals, their flesh sweet and watery against the tongue. In the richer houses, feasts might include roasted duck seasoned with honey or fish baked with herbs. Musicians sometimes came to play soft melodies as their hosts reclined on cushions, eating and talking long into the afternoon. These were moments of connection when the weight of labor fell away and the simple act of sharing food became sacred. Even for the poor, there was joy in mealtime. A farmer might eat lentil porridge with onions and garlic, while his children licked honey from their fingers. A potter could sit under the shade of his workshop roof, breaking bread with neighbors. In these modest gatherings, laughter rose like birds, startled into the air, and the tiredness of the body melted away. The Mesopotamians understood something we often forget. Eating was more than filling the stomach. It was about gathering with others, slowing down and tasting the world one bite at a time. They did not rush their meals. There were no clocks to pull them away, no machines humming in the background. Only the breeze through reeds and the low murmur of rivers. As evening approached, families lit small oil lamps shaped like shallow bowls. The golden glow flickered across their faces as they finished their meals. Elders told stories between bites of bread. Children leaned against their mothers' sides, growing sleepy as their bellies grew full. In the temples, priests offered trays of bread and dates to the gods. These offerings mirrored the meals of the people below, reminding them that food was a gift of the earth and sky. Eating was both an act of gratitude and a source of peace. The art of rest in Mesopotamia was woven into their food. To taste their dishes, was to taste their rivers, their fields, and their quiet moments of joy. On days when work paused and kitchens filled with warm scents, the people of Mesopotamia let the world slow down and embraced the pleasure of simply being alive. In the next chapter, we will discover how they played. Board games, music, and gatherings by the river gave shape to their leisure. But for now, imagine yourself seated on a reed mat, sharing bread with strangers who soon feel like friends. Life in ancient Mesopotamia was not only about farming and building and praying, it also held moments of joy and play. In the pauses between work, people found ways to amuse themselves. They crafted toys for children, told stories under starlit skies, and played games that brought laughter into their homes. One of the oldest games in history was born here along the banks of the Euphrates. It was called the Royal Game of Yore. Archaeologists found its wooden boards buried deep in tombs lined with treasures. But this was not just a game for kings and queens. Farmers, craftsmen, and merchants all enjoyed moving tiny carved pieces across a board painted with simple squares. The board itself was small enough to carry. It had a path marked out for the pieces to travel, with safe spaces and danger spaces. Players rolled dice shaped like small pyramids. Luck guided their steps, but skill also played a part. Some moved quickly, trying to race ahead. Others waited, cautiously hoping their opponents would falter. Picture a warm evening in the city of Yore. The streets are quiet now that the market stalls have closed. In a small courtyard, two friends sit cross-legged on a reed mat. A clay lamp glows faintly between them. On the ground lies a game board scratched into the dust with a stick. They each take turns flicking pebbles as markers, moving them carefully. Along the path, every so often one of them lets out a soft laugh or a groan of disappointment. In larger homes, people played on real boards, made of wood, inlaid with shells and stones. These boards were prized possessions, sometimes handed down through generations. To own a fine game board was a sign of comfort, but even a simple scratched design on a broken pot shard could bring hours of fun. Taught children had their own ways to play. They rolled clay balls down dirt alleys or tossed pebbles in games of catch. Small animal figurines made from clay or stone served as toys. Some children tied string around wooden sticks and spun them until they whirred in the air. The sound was soft and soothing, like a dragonfly's wings. Play was not limited to games. Music also filled their leisure time. Men plucked at lyres with strings of sheep gut. Women played flutes carved from reeds. Groups gathered to sing hymns and love songs, their voices carrying across rooftops in the cool night air. Even the gods were said to enjoy music. In temples, priests used drums to call down divine attention. In villages near the rivers, people often met to tell stories. Elders recited tales of great heroes like Gilgamesh and Enkidu. These stories were more than entertainment. They taught lessons about friendship, courage, and the mysteries of life and death. A child curled up in her grandmother's lap might drift off to sleep before the tale was done her dreams, carrying her into the world of ancient myths. Water itself became a place of play. On hot days, children splashed in canals that fed the fields. Young men floated on reed rafts and challenged each other to swim across wide streams. The rivers gave life to crops and animals, but they also offered relief and laughter when work was finished. Even during festivals, games, and contests brought the community together. Wrestlers competed in open squares, watched by cheering crowds. Dancers spun in circles, their feet kicking up clouds of dust. Vendors sold honey cakes and cool beer to spectators. For a time, worries fell away, and the air felt lighter at night. As the last embers in the hearth glowed, people gathered one last time before sleep. Someone might suggest a quick game on the board, one more chance to test luck and skill. The loser would laugh and vow to win tomorrow. The winner might tease, but only gently, for they knew the joy was in the playing, not the winning. Leisure in Mesopotamia was woven into daily life like threads in a woven mat. It did not need gadgets or bright screens. It needed only the closeness of family, the warmth of a shared laugh, and the steady flow of time that gave space for play. In the next chapter, we will step into the world of temples and tavern nights to see how sacred rituals and simple pleasures filled their evenings. But for now, imagine yourself sitting cross-legged on the ground with a friend under the soft glow of an oil lamp, rolling dice and feeling time slow to a gentle pace. When the golden light of day began to fade over Mesopotamia, the air grew cooler and life shifted into another rhythm. The heat of work slipped away, replaced by softer sounds and slower movements. This was a time when people sought peace for their souls or warmth for their hearts. Some turned toward the towering ziggurats and the temples where priests and priestesses offered songs to the gods. Others drifted to taverns where clay cups of beer waited and laughter floated through the night air. In the heart of every Mesopotamian city stood a temple. Its high steps rose like a mountain made by human hands reaching for the heavens. These ziggurats were more than places of worship. They were the beating heart of the community. People came here to offer thanks for a good harvest or to ask for protection against sickness and storms. As evening approached, lamps flickered in the temple courtyards. The scent of burning incense drifted on the breeze, carrying prayers upward. Men and women brought gifts of bread, dates, and fresh milk, placing them on stone altars. Priests, dressed in fine linen robes, moved silently through the cool halls, their voices low as they chanted ancient hymns. These sacred spaces gave rest to the weary mind. Here, under high ceilings painted with stars, a farmer might kneel and let go of his worries. A mother might light a small oil lamp for her sick child, whispering her hopes into the shadows. The gods of Mesopotamia were many. There was Enlil, the god of air and storms; Ishtar, the goddess of love and war; Ea, the god of water and wisdom. Each had their own day, their own sacred songs, their own way of bringing comfort to human hearts. But beyond the temple walls, the streets offered another kind of pleasure. When darkness fell, taverns opened their doors wide. The smell of roasted fish and baked bread spilled into the alleys, calling to tired workers. Inside these small mud-brick rooms, men and women gathered around low tables. Taverns were simple but welcoming. Clay jars lined the walls, filled with barley beer, sweet and thick. It was drunk from large bowls, using reed straws to filter out the husks. The beer was not strong enough to dull the senses, but it brought warmth to the belly and a gentle glow to the cheeks. Conversations flowed easily here. Farmers spoke of their fields and the rising rivers. Merchants traded stories of distant lands, where spices and precious stones were found. Young men boasted of their strength or teased each other in good humor. Sometimes a musician would appear carrying a lyre or drum. He would sit in the corner plucking soft notes as voices rose in song. Women came to the taverns too, though often they sat apart, sharing quiet laughter among themselves. They spoke of children, of weaving, of the small joys and sorrows that filled their days. Even the elderly found a place here, leaning back against the cool walls, sipping beer slowly as they watched the younger ones dance and play in the village's evenings. Were quieter but no less rich. Neighbors gathered in open courtyards, sharing simple meals of lentil stew and bread. The older ones told stories of gods and heroes, while children lay on mats, their eyelids growing heavy. In the distance, a night bird called, and the soft splash of water in irrigation canals could be heard. Festivals were the moments when sacred and secular life merged. On holy days, the entire city seemed to pause. Streets were strung with garlands of reeds and flowers. Drums beat steadily, summoning people to the temple. Their priests led processions, carrying statues of the gods on platforms draped in colorful cloth. After the rituals came the feasting. Large pots of barley stew simmered over open fires. Honey cakes were passed from hand to hand, their sweetness lingering on every tongue. Dancers whirled in wide circles, their linen skirts billowing like clouds. Even the king might join in raising his cup to the gods as musicians played. Night in Mesopotamia brought rest in many forms. Some found it in whispered prayers and flickering lamps. Others found it in the company of friends, the warmth of food and drink, and the sound of a lyre plucked gently in the dark. The people of this ancient land understood that life was not only work. The soul needed care, just as the body did. Sacred and secular pleasures balanced each other, like the sun and moon, like the rivers that gave life to their fields. As sleep crept across the land, families returned to their homes. Children curled up on reed mats wrapped in wool blankets. The air smelled faintly of bread and smoke and warm bodies. Outside, the stars turned slowly over the wide plains. In dreams, their hearts light, their minds at peace. In the next chapter, we will explore the lively markets, music, and midday naps that shaped a day in the city. But for now, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a temple courtyard, listening to the chant of priests, mingling with the faint laughter from a tavern nearby. The night is calm, and the world feels full, yet quiet. In the heart of Mesopotamia, the cities woke gently each morning. As the first pale light touched the rooftops of mud brick houses, a soft murmur spread through the narrow streets. Merchants uncovered. Here under awnings of woven reeds, traders laid out their goods in neat rows. Baskets brimmed with figs, dates, and melons, their colors rich against the pale dust. Jars of sesame oil glistened in the sun. Potters displayed bowls and jars smooth as river stones. A faint breeze carried the sharp scent of onions and the sweetness of honey cakes. Stacked high for sale, people moved slowly through the market. There was no rush, no impatient footsteps. A farmer paused to inspect a bundle of wool. A young woman tested the weight of a clay jug in her hands. Children followed their mother's eyes, wide as they reached for small toys carved from wood. At the edge of the square, musicians began to play. One man plucked a lyre, its strings humming softly. Another tapped a small drum, keeping a steady heartbeat. Rhythm. Their music wove through the warm air, light and unhurried. A group of children began to dance, their bare feet kicking up tiny clouds of dust. Their laughter rose like bird calls above the steady hum of voices. The Mesopotamian day unfolded in gentle layers. As the sun climbed higher, the air grew thick with heat. Traders spoke more softly now, their voices slower and lower. The houses, courtyards offered coolness. A tree might spread its branches overhead, leaves casting dappled patterns of light on the ground. Here families gathered for the midday meal. Flatbread, still warm from the oven, was torn and shared. Bowls of lentil stew passed from hand to hand. Slices of melon were eaten slowly, their sweetness a balm against the heat. After eating, the world seemed to grow quiet. Even the birds in the trees stilled their songs. This was the time for rest. Adults stretched out on reed mats, their eyes closing as the warm weight of sleep pressed gently down. Children curled beside their mothers, their small breaths soft and even. The midday nap was not a luxury, but a rhythm woven into life. The work of the morning was done, the heat of the afternoon too heavy for labor. Musicians sometimes played for their masters, plucking slow melodies that lulled the listeners into dreams. Even in the king's palace, the great halls fell silent as nobles reclined on couches, their minds drifting like boats on the Tigris. Outside in the streets, the silence deepened. The market was deserted now, awnings folded and stalls empty. Dogs lay in the shade of walls, their tails twitching in sleep. The only sound was the low whisper of wind moving between the houses. When the sun began to sink, the city stirred again. Merchants returned to their stalls, arranging their goods for evening buyers. Bakers pulled new loaves from their ovens, their crusts golden and fragrant. Musicians tuned their instruments, ready to play once more as neighbors gathered in the square. The Mesopotamians understood the balance between activity and stillness. They worked hard, but they also honored rest. Music filled their leisure with joy. Markets brought people together in slow, gentle movement, but in harmony with the sun, the rivers, and the quiet spaces between one moment and the next. As night approached, lamps flickered to life in the homes and streets. Families ate their evening meals under the soft glow of oil lights. Stories were told and songs were sung until sleep came again, wrapping the city in silence. In the next chapter, we will step into the royal courts to see how even kings found ways to pause and enjoy the world around them. But for now, imagine yourself lying in the cool shade of a courtyard, listening to the faint hum of a lyre as your eyes grow heavy and the world drifts away. In Mesopotamia, even the mightiest king could not work from sunrise to sunset without pause. Power was heavy like the carved stone tablets that carried his laws. It pressed on his shoulders as he listened to disputes in the court, as he commanded scribes to record trade agreements, and as he sent messages to distant cities. Yet there were moments when the king set down the weight of rule and let the world turn without his touch. The royal palace was a city within the city. Its walls were high and thick, built from sun-baked bricks. Within these walls, courtyards bloomed with date palms and flowering reeds. Pools of clear water reflected the pale blue sky. Servants moved quietly along shaded corridors, their bare feet making no sound. On the days when duties lifted, the king walked through these gardens slowly. His robes of fine linen whispered softly as they brushed against his legs. He paused to watch birds dart among the palm fronds. The air smelled faintly of fig trees and the warm clay walls that held the day's heat. A king's rest was not the same as a farmer's, but it still carried the same purpose. It was a time to breathe, to listen to his own thoughts, and to remember that life was not only laws and letters. In the mornings, he might sit in the cool shade of a pavilion. Attendants brought platters of food, fresh bread, honey cakes, figs, and roasted lamb seasoned with coriander and cumin. He ate slowly, tasting each bite as reed flutes played soft melodies nearby. Sometimes his children joined him, their laughter bright in the quiet courtyard. Music was woven into these hours of leisure. Skilled musicians stood at a respectful distance, plucking lyres and strumming harps. Their songs told of ancient gods, of love's sweetness and sorrow, of the slow turning of seasons. The king listened, his eyes half closed, as the sound filled the warm, still air. In the afternoons he might play the royal game of yore with a trusted advisor or family member. The inlaid game board lay between them, its smooth squares gleaming in the sunlight. Pieces carved from bone and shell clicked gently as they moved. The game's flow was unhurried, like the river beyond the palace walls. If the king wished, he could visit the temple where priests offered prayers for his health and strength. There, in the high, cool halls, the air was thick with the scent of incense. He watched as sacred fires flickered and listened to the low chant of hymns rising toward the gods. Even a ruler needed moments to place his burdens in divine hands. As evening fell, the palace shifted again. Lanterns were lit, casting golden pools of light across the stone floors. Servants brought bowls of beer, thick and nourishing, and platters of fruit cooled in water. Musicians returned with softer, slower songs as dancers moved gracefully to the beat of small hand drums. Here in the great hall, the king watched and listened. He did not speak much on these evenings. His face was calm, his mind drifting like a reed boat on still water. Around him the palace breathed with quiet life. In these hours, the king was not a ruler, but a man. He felt the ache of muscles grown stiff from sitting in judgment. He felt the warmth of his children's hands and the softness of wool cushions beneath his fingers. He felt the ancient truth that rest was not weakness, but strength renewed. Even the gods took their ease. In the myths of Mesopotamia, there were stories of divine feasts where Enlil and Ishtar and Ea gathered in joy. Night deepened, the king's attendants drew back, leaving him alone in the garden. The stars bloomed one by one above the palm trees. A faint breeze stirred the water in the pools. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, a dog barked and a child laughed in her sleep. The king lay back on a low couch, gazing upward. He thought of the river's steady flow, of fields ripening in the sun, of the people sleeping peacefully in their homes. He felt the rhythm of his own heart, slow and steady, like the drumbeat of time itself. Rest was not only for the poor or weary. It was for all living things. It was the breath between one moment and the next, the stillness that allowed the world to keep moving in the next chapter. We will leave the palace walls and walk into the villages to see how farmers found their own quiet joys when the work was done. But for now, picture yourself seated in a shaded courtyard, the air warm and soft music, drifting like a dream as the day folds gently into night. Far from the high walls of Mesopotamia's great cities lay villages where life moved with the slow rhythm of sun and river. Here in the wide open plains, dotted with date palms and reeds, farmers rose with the first light and worked until the air shimmered with heat. But when the tools were set aside and the fields fell silent, there came a different kind of life. In the village's rest was not something taken, but something earned. It came naturally, like the evening breeze drifting across the canals. It was woven into every hour after labor and carried in every step as people returned from the fields with baskets. His hands were rough and calloused from guiding the plow, but he held them open now, feeling the cool air settle on his skin. Meal. The farmer stepped into his courtyard, where his children played with clay animals shaped like goats and birds. Their laughter rose into the air, light as the wings of sparrows. His wife offered him water from a clay jug, and he drank deeply the cool liquid, washing away the taste of dust. The meal was simple but satisfying. Flatbread baked in an outdoor oven, lentil stew, flavored with garlic and wild herbs, fresh dates, and a little goat cheese. The family sat on reed mats, their bare feet resting on packed earth, still warm from the day's sun. Each bite was chewed slowly as they spoke of the day's work, the weather, and the coming festival in the nearby town. When the meal was finished, the youngest children grew sleepy. The older ones played a quiet game with pebbles and circles, scratched into the dirt. As the stars began to bloom above, the village elders gathered in a corner of the courtyard. Their voices were low and steady, telling stories of gods and heroes. The children who could stay awake listened wide-eyed as they heard of Gilgamesh, the great king who sought immortality, and Enkidu, his wild friend who ran with the animals. These stories were not rushed. Each word fell gently, like a leaf drifting to the ground. The pauses between words were as important as the words themselves. The children learned patience, here how to listen, how to let their minds fill with images of distant worlds and ancient truths. Music, too, was part of their rest. Someone brought out a small flute carved from river reeds and played a simple tune. The sound floated through the village, soft and sweet, mingling with the night air. It calmed the animals tied in their pens and seemed to slow even the stars in their endless turning. For the farmers of Mesopotamia, leisure. The fields would always be there, the rivers would always rise and fall, but in these moments they could feel themselves part of something larger. A rhythm that bound the earth, the sky, and all living things together. The women spoke softly among themselves as they ground wheat into flour for the next day. They shared news from neighbors and offered small jokes that made them smile. The men spoke of tools and crops, but their voices were low, without the sharpness of midday debates. Older boys sometimes challenged each other to wrestling matches in the open spaces between houses. Their movements were slow and playful there, laughter carrying across the fields. Girls sat in small circles, weaving flower crowns or bracelets from reeds. Their fingers moved quickly, but their faces were calm, their eyes watching the stars. Overhead, as the night deepened, families drifted indoors. They lay on simple beds made of reed mats, covered with wool blankets. The air smelled faintly of smoke from the hearth and the warm, sweet scent of sleeping children. Outside, crickets sang in the tall grasses and frogs croaked from the irrigation. Canals. Sleep came easily here. There were no clocks, no lamps to chase away the dark. Only the steady rise and fall of breathing, the warmth of family gathered close, and the slow turning of the stars. The farmers knew the day would begin again with the first light. There would be fields to tend, animals to feed, and water to carry. But for now there was only this moment, quiet and complete. In the next chapter we will join the Mesopotamians in their moments of social joy as they share beer, bread, and laughter in gatherings big and small. But for now, picture yourself lying on a simple mat under a roof of woven reeds, the cool night air brushing your skin as the sounds of the village. People turned toward one another. This was their time to gather and share, to rest their tired hands and fill their hearts with warmth. For them, life was not just about work and worship. It was about the small joys of sitting with neighbors, breaking bread and tasting beer brewed from barley. In the cities and villages alike, beer was the drink of choice. It was not clear and golden like the beers of today, but thick and hearty, almost like a meal in itself. Slowly in large clay jars until it was ready to be shared. Evening was the hour for beer. Men and women sat on low stools or red mats in courtyards and taverns, their cups raised high. They laughed softly as they sipped through long reed straws that filtered the grains from the brew. Beer brought people together. It loosened tongues and made stories flow like the rivers that cradled their world. Along with beer came bread. Bakers worked early in the day, shaping soft dough into flat rounds. These were baked in ovens that glowed with heat, their walls lined with fire-blackened clay. In the evenings, families tore pieces of bread and dipped them into bowls of lentil stew or spread them with sesame oil and crushed dates for a touch of sweetness. In taverns, the scent of roasted fish drifted through the air. The rooms were simple, mud brick walls smoothed by countless hands, low tables and clay lamps flickering with soft light. Here, farmers spoke of their crops, scribes complained of cramped fingers, and travelers told tales of distant lands where the stars looked different in the night sky. Music often filled these gatherings. A musician might arrive carrying a lyre or a small drum. He sat in the corner, plucking strings or tapping out a slow, steady rhythm. The sound seemed to wrap around the people like a warm blanket, drawing them closer together. Women also gathered to share their own stories. They sat apart in quiet corners, their voices weaving together. As they spoke of children weaving, cooking, and the little triumphs and troubles of their days. Some cradled infants in their arms, while older children played nearby with clay toys shaped like sheep and goats. Laughter came easily in these hours. It was not loud or wild, but soft and steady, like the bubbling of a gentle stream. Even those who carried heavy burdens felt lighter here. To sit with others to share food and drink was to remember that no one was truly alone. The Mesopotamians had many words for bread and beer, and their importance went beyond the physical. They were symbols of life's sweetness, of hospitality, of the bond between neighbors and friends. Sharing them was a way of honoring the gods and each other. In the villages, the mood was calmer, but no less joyful. Neighbors gathered in open courtyards, bringing small bowls of food to share. The children ran barefoot in the dust, their laughter carrying far into the evening. The men sat in a circle, discussing the rising rivers and the promise of a good harvest. The women worked quietly nearby, braiding reeds or mending clothes. The night air grew cooler as people returned to their homes, carrying the warmth of companionship in their hearts. In these moments, beer, bread, and banter wove together to create a kind of magic. They were simple things, yet they held the power to soothe tired bodies and ease restless minds. The people of Mesopotamia understood that joy was found not in grand displays, but in small shared pleasures. As sleep settled over the land, the streets grew quiet, dogs curled in doorways, lamps burned low, and the last soft notes of a lyre faded into the darkness. In the next chapter, we will explore the tender side of Mesopotamian life, in love songs and lovers' walks through the ancient streets. But for now, picture yourself seated in a small courtyard with a warm cup in your hands, the scent of bread in the air, and the sound of gentle laughter carrying into the night. When the sun sank behind the walls of Mesopotamia's cities and the air cooled at last, the streets took on a softer shape. The noise of markets faded. The smells of baking bread and cooking stews lingered in the still air. And in this quiet hour, hearts began to turn gently toward one another. The Mesopotamians knew love in all its forms. There were grand loves sung in temple hymns, and quiet loves that bloomed in courtyards and along narrow lanes. Love was a thread running through their lives, tying families together, inspiring poets and giving rest to lonely souls. In the great city of Uruk, a young man might stand at the edge of the square, waiting for a glimpse of the girl whose eyes had caught his own. She passed with her mother, carrying a basket of dates, her long dark hair falling over her shoulder. He lowered his eyes, but smiled faintly. In Mesopotamia, a glance could say as much as 1,000 words. When words were needed, there were always songs lovers sang to one another beneath the stars, their voices low so as not to wake the children sleeping on reed mats nearby. The songs spoke of blooming gardens, of rivers that would never run dry, of hearts that beat like twin drums in time. The goddess Ishtar herself was said to delight in love's sweetness. In her temples, priests and priestesses sang hymns to her beauty and her fierce power. Some songs were bold and bright, others soft as a whisper carried on the evening wind. In villages, love was quieter still. A boy walking home from the fields might leave a small gift of figs or flowers at a girl's doorway. She would find it in the morning, smiling to herself as she stepped barefoot into the dust. Later, they might meet by chance at the well, drawing water, side by side, speaking little but feeling much. Marriage was common and practical, yet affection often grew within it, like a vine climbing a sunlit wall. Husbands and wives shared tasks and laughter. In the evenings, they sat together in courtyards, watching their children play. They spoke in gentle tones of the day's work, of small worries and small joys. Young love sometimes played out in secret. In narrow alleys or along the quiet banks of canals, couples strolled hand in hand, their sandals whispering against packed earth. The moonlight turned the water silver, and the reeds swayed softly. These were moments that needed no witness, only the beating of two hearts in time with each other. For those whose love could not be spoken aloud, there were still ways to express it. a carved token left in the market, a verse pressed into a clay tablet, a simple smile offered at the right moment. The Mesopotamians knew how to speak without words, how to fill silence with meaning. Even in the royal palaces, love found its place. Kings took wives and concubines for political reasons, but some found true affection within their walls. A queen might send her husband a gift of honey cakes with a message written in careful cuneiform. He might answer with a song composed by his court musicians, its melody drifting across marble halls. At night, as the stars turned slowly overhead, lovers lay side by side, their bodies warm beneath woven blankets. Outside, crickets sang in the tall grass. The air smelled of smoke and flowers, and the faint sweetness of sesame oil. Dreams came easily after such nights. In sleep, the lovers walked together through gardens where date palms bent low with fruit, and rivers flowed forever, cool and clear. Love in Mesopotamia was not always grand or dramatic. Often it was simple and steady, like the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates. It wove into daily life, into bread baked together, into laughter shared over cups of beer, into the soft touch of a hand resting on another. In the next chapter, we will look at festivals and the joy they brought to the people's hearts as music, laughter, and dance filled the streets. But for now, imagine yourself walking beside a loved one along a quiet canal. The night air warm and the stars reflected in the still water. 12:42 a.m., the 9th of July, 2025. 92308 801 7741. When the seasons turned in ancient Mesopotamia and the first signs of harvest or rainfall appeared in the distance, people gathered not just to work or pray, but to celebrate. In a world shaped by sun and river and time carved gently into clay tablets, the rhythm of life found its brightest notes in festivals. These were the days when all things paused, when work stopped, temples opened their arms wide, and even the quietest heart found its way into the rhythm of drums and dance. In the cities, festivals began early. The streets were swept clean, and garlands of reeds and flowers were hung over doorways. Traders arrived with wagons full of food, bright cloth, small toys, and oils that smelled of cinnamon and cedarwood. Children ran barefoot between the stalls, laughing and pointing at carved animals or sweet cakes piled high. The air itself felt lighter, touched by music and expectation. The temples led the way. Priests and priestesses, dressed in robes dyed deep blue or shining white, chanted prayers to the gods. They burned incense in tall braziers. The smoke curled upward like thin silver threads climbing toward the sun. Offerings of bread, honey, beer, and fruit were placed on sacred altars. The people gathered in long lines, their heads bowed, waiting to place their gifts and whisper their wishes. Each god had a day or season. Ishtar, goddess of love and war, was honored with dances that swirled like windstorms. Enlil, god of storms and breath, received deep chants and the beating of heavy drums that echoed like distant thunder. Ea, the god of wisdom, was celebrated with storytelling, riddles, and recitations. The people didn't fear their gods during these moments. They danced with them. Once the ceremonies ended, the celebrations spilled into the streets. Musicians stood on corners playing lyres, flutes, and drums. The music was not loud, but constant and undercurrent, like the rivers that flowed behind the city walls. The melodies shifted from slow and haunting to quick and light, drawing feet to movement, turning heads toward one another, and reminding everyone that joy, too, was sacred. In the main square, dancers began to move. They spun slowly at first, in pairs or alone, their arms wide like birds in flight. Some danced in circles, holding hands, feet tapping against packed earth, sandals kicking up little puffs of dust. Their bodies moved with the memory of water, with the grace of harvest winds. No one needed instruction. Everyone knew the steps because joy required no lessons. Food was everywhere. Clay bowls filled with stews made from lentils, chickpeas, lamb, garlic, and herbs. Flatbreads stacked high beside pots of sesame oil. Melons split open to reveal juicy red centers. Beer poured from wide jars into red cup vessels. People sat on the ground, in the shade of awnings, beside temple steps, under trees. They shared bites and drinks and stories. They shared laughter with strangers and leaned against friends like trees leaning toward sunlight. Even the elders joined, sitting in shaded corners, watching the young dance. Their faces held quiet smiles. Some clapped softly. Some told stories to children gathered at their feet, stories of festivals from long ago when they had danced in the same square, wearing the same garlands, beneath the same sun. As the day wore on and the sun dropped lower, shadows grew long and golden. The musicians slowed their playing. The dancers swayed more gently. A calm settled across the city, not of tiredness, but of fullness. People had laughed, eaten, sung, and remembered that they were not alone. In the dust and music and touch of each other's hands, they had been part of something wide and soft and whole. In the countryside, festivals were simpler, but no less joyful. Families gathered in open fields. They built fires and roasted meat on wooden spits. Children played games with pebbles and sticks. Women sang while grinding grain, their voices echoing over the plains. Men told jokes and raced each other barefoot through the dust, their laughter bursting like sparrows, startled into flight. In these rural gatherings, people brought whatever they had: a bowl of dates, a jug of beer, a fresh-baked loaf of bread. The gifts were laid out on blankets and mats. No one counted. No one kept score. There was always enough because everyone came with open hands. When night arrived, the real magic began. Oil lamps were lit and placed around the edges of the square or field. Their glow flickered softly on faces, casting long, wavering shadows. The stars came out, one by one, until the sky was filled with them, like seeds scattered across black earth. Underneath that canopy of quiet fire, the singing began again. Now, the songs were slower, gentler, carrying the hush of night within their melodies. Couples swayed together. Friends leaned shoulder to shoulder. Children curled against their parents, their eyes growing heavy. The Mesopotamians knew how to rest, how to pray, how to work, but they also knew how to celebrate. And not in haste or noise, but in rhythm, in softness, in song, in the shared breath of 100 lives dancing for the same sun. These festivals were more than days off. They were days that filled the spirit. They reminded everyone, rich and poor, farmer and scribe, king and child, that they belonged to the earth, the rivers, the sky, and to each other. That even in a world of labor and gods and fate, there was time for sweetness, In the next chapter, we will slip into the silence of rest itself, tracing how Mesopotamians slept under the stars and how the night carried them gently into dreams. But for now, close your eyes and imagine yourself sitting in the soft light of an oil lamp, the last notes of a flute fading in the warm night air. Your hands still scented with bread, your feet still remembering the feel of dance. When the last embers of the fire burned low and the clay lamps dimmed to a gentle glow, the people of Mesopotamia prepared for rest. In this ancient land, sleep was not a hurried escape, but a quiet return to the rhythm of life. The rivers slowed their song, the wind softened its breath, and families lay down under roofs of reeds and clay to let the night carry them away. Sleep began with simple rituals. In the cities, people swept the dust from their courtyards before nightfall, sprinkling water to cool the earth. The scent of baked bread and smoldering incense still lingered in the air. Inside mud-brick houses, mothers tucked children on to read. Mats spread over the packed floor, covering them with blankets woven from wool. Fathers sat nearby in the fading light, murmuring quiet words to soothe restless little ones. In wealthier homes, beds were built from wooden frames, strung with rope or reeds. Soft padding of wool and straw made them comfortable and warm. Pillows, stuffed with dried grasses, cradled tired heads. Around these beds hung curtains of linen to keep insects away and give the sleepers privacy. But many chose to sleep under the open sky. In the warm seasons, families climbed ladders to flat rooftops, carrying their mats and blankets. Here, the air was cooler. The stars above stretched endlessly across the heavens, and the slow turning of constellations became a silent clock for the night. Children gazed upward as they drifted off, tracing patterns in the skylines of bright points they imagined as animals, gods, and rivers of light. In the villages, sleep came after long days in the fields. Farmers returned home dusty and weary, yet content. After the evening meal, they washed their hands and faces with water drawn from clay jars, left in the shade all day to stay cool. Then they sat quietly in doorways, watching the last glow of sunlight fade from the horizon. Sleep began early for most. Without clocks or electric lights, the world's rhythms guided them. Dreams held a special place in Mesopotamian life. The people believed that in dreams the gods spoke to them, offering warnings, blessings, or glimpses of the future. A farmer who dreamt of a rising river might wake and decide to prepare for a flood. A mother dreaming of a bird carrying her child across the sky would whisper prayers of protection over her. Baby in the morning. In temples, priests were trained as dream interpreters. They kept clay tablets filled with symbols and their meanings. A dream of a lion might mean strength or danger. A dream of water flowing clear and deep could mean health and abundance. Hushed as they recounted visions seen in the night. Before sleeping, some recited soft prayers to keep bad dreams away. They spoke to the god Ea, protector of wisdom and magic, asking him to send only peaceful visions. Others placed small amulets. Under their pillows carved figures of animals or gods, meant to guard them through the dark hours. The sounds of the night became part of rest. In the cities, dogs barked in the distance. Clay jars creaked as they cooled from the day's heat. In the countryside, Crickets sang and frogs croaked from the irrigation canals. The gentle whisper of the wind through palm leaves soothed tired minds. Sometimes couples whispered to each other in the dark, sharing hopes and fears in voices no louder than a breath. Parents stroked the hair of children half asleep beside them. Solitude was rare in Mesopotamia, but even in shared spaces, even the watchmen at the city gates spoke softly, their torches glowing faintly in the thick night air. Above, the stars turned slowly, as they always had, cargers of time older than any temple or king. Waking came naturally when the first birds called and the faint glow of dawn appeared. In those moments between dream and waking, the Mesopotamians stretched their arms, took slow, deep breaths, and felt the world beginning again. Rest was sacred. It gave strength for the labor of the fields and markets, for the prayers in the temples and the laughter in the taverns. It renewed not just the body, but the soul. In the next chapter, we will walk with the scribes and artisans on their days of leisure, watching how they found inspiration in clay, stone, and words. But for now, imagine yourself lying on a rooftop, wrapped in a soft blanket, the air cool against your skin as you gaze at stars bright enough to guide dreams. The world is quiet. Even time seems to rest. Tapping clay, the soft scratch of reeds across wet tablets, and the low murmur of voices, dictating contracts, prayers, and stories. But there were hours when even the busiest scribes set down their styluses, and the most careful artisans let their hands rest. In those moments, they stepped away from duty into a quiet space where creativity flowed not from obligation, but from joy. Scribes were the keepers of words and numbers. In narrow rooms, lit by small clay lamps, they spent long days pressing wedge-shaped marks into soft clay. Their fingers were skilled and quick, yet even they longed for pauses. When their hands cramped from writing lists of grain or laws of kings, they looked to other forms of expression: poems, hymns, and stories, to soothe the mind. Some scribes wandered to the riverbank after work, carrying small tablets and styluses, not to record taxes, but to compose verses inspired by the whisper of reeds and the ripples of water. They wrote gently of love and loss of gods, and dreams of the beauty of a blooming date palm and the sadness of a setting sun. Their words were soft gifts to themselves and sometimes to the world, if others were lucky enough to hear them recited. Artisans, to found their leisure in creation. In workshops where dust hung in golden shafts of light, they worked with clay, wood, and stone, shaping the ordinary into the beautiful. When orders slowed and the day's work was done, some stayed behind, not to meet demand, but to play with their tools. A potter might spin her wheel, slowly forming bowls too delicate to sell, but perfect for holding water lilies. A carver might shape a tiny animal figurine with loving care, knowing a child would treasure it. A weaver might let her shuttle drift lazily through her loom, creating patterns inspired by the stars she had watched the night before. In markets, their crafts spoke of these moments of quiet joy. A cup etched with swirling lines that resembled the flow of rivers. A jar painted with the pale blue of dawn skies. A reed mat woven so finely that it felt like water slipping beneath the fingers. The Mesopotamians did not separate art from life. Their leisure was not idleness, but a slowing of the breath, a soft turning inward where the hands moved, because the heart needed to speak. In the evenings, scribes and artisans often gathered together, Sitting on reed mats under the pale glow of oil lamps, they shared their creations. One might recite a poem in a low voice, while others listened, eyes closed, savoring the images carried on the words. Another might unroll a small clay tablet with an intricate design pressed into its surface and pass it gently from hand to hand. Music joined them too. A lyre's notes drifted across the group light as the breeze that stirred their hair. Someone hummed a melody. A rhythm formed as hands tapped softly on knees or clay jars. They did not perform for applause, but for connection, for the shared breath of creation that wove them together. Children watched wide-eyed as their parents shaped small toys or sketched animals in the dust with sticks. They learned that leisure was not wasted time but sacred time when the soul stretched and grew like a young tree reaching toward the sun. Even in the grand palaces, creativity bloomed. Kings commissioned murals and sculptures, but artisans, sometimes, left secret markstini personal symbols hidden in a corner of a wall or carved into the base of a statue. These private touches were not for rulers or gods, but for themselves. Leisure also took the form of teaching. Older scribes guided apprentices in the art of cuneiform, showing them how to hold the stylus, just so how to press each mark with care and balance. It was work, yet it was also Plathia's joy of seeing young hands learning. The dance of symbols that could carry ideas across time. As night deepened, families gathered in courtyards to hear these scribes and artisans share their skills. A father told his children how he had shaped a clay jar so perfect that it seemed to sing when filled with water. A mother showed her daughter how to weave a pattern into cloth that told a story of rivers and stars. Above them, the constellations turned slowly in the dark sky. The stars had watched countless hands shape clay, carve stone, weave reeds, and write words. It reminded people that beyond toil and duty, there was beauty to be made and shared. It was a time to listen, not just to the voices of others, but to the quiet voice within. In the next chapter, we will step into moments of private reflection and meditation, discovering how Mesopotamians found peace in solitude and silence. But for now, imagine yourself sitting in a cool workshop, your fingers tracing patterns in soft clay as a gentle melody drifts through the air. The world outside is still, and you feel the steady beat of your own heart in perfect time with the turning earth in the heart of Mesopotamia, where rivers curved like soft lines drawn by patient hands. There were moments when the world seemed to hold its breath. The farmers paused in their fields, wiping sweat from their brows as they gazed at the horizon. Scribes set down their styluses, letting their fingers uncurl. Even the busy marketplaces quieted for an instant as sunlight shifted across mud-brick walls. These were the moments when the people found peace in stillness. Solitude was not loneliness here. It was a space between thoughts, a gentle pause in the flow of life. In the cities and villages, people understood the need to step back, to listen, not to others, but to the slow, steady voice inside themselves. At the edge of a young potter walked to the river at dawn. Her feet moved soundlessly over packed earth, still cool from the night. The air smelled of clay and water and distant fires. She carried nothing in her hands. She needed nothing but the quiet as she sat on a flat stone and watched the river's surface ripple with soft light. Her breathing slowed. The worries of yesterday fell away like dust shaken from a reed mat. This was her meditation. There were no chants or rituals, only her presence. Only the hush of reeds swaying and water flowing gently toward the sea. In the temples, priests and priestesses found stillness in other ways. They lit small lamps in shadowed halls, where incense curled upward like a serpent of smoke. Kneeling before sacred statues, they closed their eyes and listened to their own hearts. Each beat was like a drum, deep and steady. It reminded them they were alive, part of the earth, part of the stars. For farmers, solitude came at dusk. After the fields were watered and tools set aside, they lingered on doorsteps, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Children slept inside. The air carried the faint scent of baked bread and wild herbs. In these moments, the body felt heavy and calm, as if it had given all it could, and now needed only to rest. Scribes, windows at the streets below. Watching a child chase a dog or a merchant fold his cloth, they felt a small, quiet joy. For a moment, there were no kings to serve, no ledgers to balance, no laws to copy. Only life flowing softly outside like a river moving past reeds. Meditation did not always mean sitting still. Some found it in movement. Shepherds wandered the plains, their feet brushing through tall grasses as they followed their flocks. They hummed low tunes to themselves, songs older than memory. The rhythm of walking and the endless sky above brought peace without words. In the palaces, even kings sought solitude. A ruler might walk alone in the gardens at night, his robes whispering against stone paths. He stopped beside a pool where moonlight shimmered on still water. Here, in the darkness, with no court or advisors watching, he could feel his own smallness, his place in the vast, turning world. Mesopotamians believed the gods themselves rested. In stories, Enlil withdrew to the mountains after shaping the winds. Ishtar retreated to hidden chambers when her heart ached with longing. Ea lay in deep waters, letting the waves rock him like a child. If even the divine paused, why should mortals not do the same? Sometimes people sought solitude together. A group of women sat in a circle, weaving baskets, their hands moving in silence. A pair of friends walked side by side, saying nothing, yet sharing everything. A family rested in a courtyard. As the stars brightened above them, each person alone in thought, yet wrapped in the warmth of others nearby. Dreams came more easily after such stillness. As people lay on mats or beds, the quiet settled over them like a soft blanket. Canals and the stars turned in their slow, ancient dance. Solitude was not escape, it was a return, a gentle reminder that life was not only work and words, but breath and being. It gave strength for the next day's labors and sharpened the sweetness of shared laughter and love. In the next chapter, we will listen to the stories told in marketplaces and temples, tales that shaped the hearts of Mesopotamia. But for now, imagine yourself sitting on a cool stone by a wide, slow river, your eyes half closed as the wind brushes past your face. You are still. They flowed like water through canals and like wind across open fields. They were whispered in homes, sung in temples, and carved carefully into clay tablets that waited patiently for thousands of years. Stories were the heart of Mesopotamia. They did not just entertain, they taught, they healed, they reminded the people of their place beneath the stars. At the edge of a bustling marketplace, a storyteller stood barefoot in the dust, his robe tied loosely at the waist. Then adults drifted closer, merchants with baskets of figs, farmers with hands still rough from the plow. Even travelers stopped and leaned on their staffs, listening. The man's voice was soft but steady, like a river flowing through reeds. He spoke of Gilgamesh, the great king of Uruk, and Enkidu, the wild man who became his brother. The tale was ancient even then, yet it felt alive in the air, as if the gods themselves whispered through his lips. The people listened as Gilgamesh wrestled lions, as he crossed forests and deserts, seeking the secret of eternal life. They felt his grief when Enkidu died. They sighed softly as Gilgamesh learned that immortality lived not in the body, but in the love and memory of those left behind. Stories like this bound the community together. In the telling, people saw themselves reflected. They knew the struggle of work, the ache of loss, the longing for meaning in a vast and mysterious world. In the quiet of the temples, priests and priestesses told other tales. Hymns to Inanna's descent into the underworld, to Enlil's command of the winds, to Eos' wisdom in shaping the world's rivers. These stories were sacred yet familiar. They gave shape to the cycles of planting and harvest, of birth and death, of light and darkness. Elders in small villages kept their own stories alive, rhythmic. They told how the first farmers learned to coax barley from the earth, how the rivers had once fought like jealous brothers, and how the stars were the scattered seeds of a divine gardener. Yet, unwilling to miss a word, even artisans wove stories into their work. A potter etched images into jars, figures of gods and animals locked in ancient dances. A weaver knotted symbols into cloth patterns that spoke of rain and sun and the endless turning of time. These objects carried their stories silently, yet they spoke to every hand that touched them. In the taverns where beer flowed and laughter rose, stories took a livelier shape. Neighbors shared tales of clever foxes outwitting hunters, of foolish kings tricked by wise peasants. They told of long journeys and strange lands where rivers ran backward and trees bore golden fruit. The listeners smiled and shook their heads, yet a quiet spark of wonder lingered in their eyes. Stories also lived in dreams. A farmer might wake and remember a vision of a great bird soaring over the fields and go to the temple for an interpretation. A mother dreamed of a lion and a lamb drinking together and whispered her vision to her husband as they lay beneath wool blankets in the dark. Words mattered here. From a deep well, to speak was to create. To tell a story was to weave together past, present, and future. On rooftops, under skies lit with stars. Some were real, some imagined, but all were true in their own way. They spoke of how they met, of the life they hoped to build, of how the gods had written their names together in the constellations above. As night deepened and the lamps burned low, the stories slowed, voices softened. Even in dreams, the stories lingered, shaping visions that felt ancient and new all at once. In Mesopotamia, words were alive. They moved through time like rivers, never stopping, never fading completely. They taught that every person was part of a larger story, a chapter written in clay and water and light. In the final chapter, we will return to the heart of Mesopotamia to watch the rivers flow and the people rest once more as we step gently out of their world. But for now, imagine yourself seated on cool earth, in a quiet courtyard, as a gentle voice weaves a tale in the soft glow of an oil lamp. The story settles over you like a warm blanket, carrying you toward dreams. The rivers flowed, as they always had, under the fading light of the sun. The Tigris and Euphrates wound their way across the land like threads of silver pulled through soft earth. The fields around them were quiet now. The tools were set aside. The markets had closed. In the air hung the faint scents of baked bread, sweet dates, and distant fires. It was the end of another day. It was also the end of many days, for we are leaving Mesopotamia now, stepping gently away from its streets and fields, its temples and courtyards. On this last night, the people went about their lives as they always did. A woman brushed her child's hair with fingers worn smooth by work and love. She hummed a tune older than memory as she tucked a wool blanket around small shoulders. A man stretched his tired arms and stared at the horizon, where the sun melted into a wash of gold and rose. He said nothing, but felt the weight of the day slipped from his body, like dust falling from his robe in the villages. The air was cool now. Shadows stretched long across packed earth. Children played quietly at their feet, drawing shapes in the dust-simple animals, suns, and rivers. Parents watched with soft eyes. They spoke in low voices of fields and flocks, of neighbors and news. Their words carried no urgency. They were not planning. They were only being dot in the cities. Life slowed but did not stop. Merchants secured the doors to their stalls. Bakers checked their ovens one last time before walking home. The streets grew still, except for the occasional bark of a dog or the creak of a wooden cart rolling toward the city gates. On the rooftops, people spread mats and blankets, preparing to sleep beneath the stars. The stars were bright tonight. They hung like jewels against the deep black sky, turning slowly as they had for thousands of years. To the Mesopotamians, these stars were not just lights, but stories. They were the gods, handwriting a record of creation and time. Farmers watched them to know when to plant and harvest. Lovers watched them and whispered promises into the night air. Children stared upward, asking quiet questions that would never leave their lips. Inside the temples, priests lit small lamps and placed offerings before the statues of the gods. The smell of incense drifted through darkened halls. Their chants were soft and steady, like a heartbeat. They prayed for protection through the night and for strength in the coming day. The gods were silent, as always, but the people felt their presence in the quiet and the glow of the flames. As the night deepened, the last voices faded. Even the animals grew still. Dogs curled in doorways. Cows shifted softly in their pens. Birds settled in the branches of date palms, their feathers fluffed against the cool air. This was the Mesopotamian way. Life was not lived in great moments alone, but in small ones, strung together like beads on a thread. A sip of beer shared with a friend. The warmth of bread fresh from the oven. A story whispered under an oil lamp. A child's laugh. A lover's touch. These were the treasures that filled the days and nights in the final hours before sleep. Some stayed awake just a little longer. A potter sat on her rooftop, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. She thought of the clay waiting in her workshop, of the bowl she would shape tomorrow. A scribe leaned against a cool wall, staring at the stars. He thought of the words he would press into wet clay at dawn. Both felt the same quiet peace, knowing their lives were part of something larger than themselves, woven into the fabric of rivers, soil, and sky. As sleep came, dreams drifted like soft clouds across the land. In those dreams, people saw the gods walking beside them. They saw fields bursting with barley and rivers running high and clear. They saw their children grown and strong. They saw their own faces reflected in pools of still water, calm and content. We leave them here. We leave them in their homes of clay and reeds, in their fields of barley and wheat, in their temples of stone and fire. We leave them beneath stars that will outlast kings and empires, beneath a sky that has seen every moment of their lives. Their world was not perfect. It was shaped by labor and hardship, by floods and wars. But it was also shaped by music and laughter, by bread and beer, by love and stories, by hands that built and voices that sang. As we step away, we carry their quiet wisdom with us. The wisdom that says life is not about hurrying to the next thing, but about pausing here, in this moment, to feel the warmth of the sun, the coolness of water, the softness of a child's hand. The rivers flow on, the stars turn, and the people of Mesopotamia rest, their dreams cradled by the night. Close your eyes now. Imagine lying on a rooftop in Uruk or Nippur. The air is warm, but the breeze is cool on your face. The stars above, you feel the slow rise and fall of your breath, the gentle beat of your heart. The world is quiet. You are part of it, and it is part of you. Sleep comes easily here.